This lesson for the Koine Project class, we will look at the Einstellung Effect with reference to the sovereignty of God and the free will of man. First of all, this is not a problem. It's presented that way. It's presented either or as a false dichotomy. And again, that's what the Einstellung Effect is about. It's about approaching something, a problem, for example, which in this case will demonstrate that it's not a problem, or approaching a dichotomy or anything with a methodology that toward which we have a bias. So we solve any problem the same old way. As we were told, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and that is perhaps largely responsible for why we see people galvanized around their identities, their camps, their constructs, similar to what we see in the political arena now in the debate for a presidential election coming up. And here it's late August, it's 2024, and we really don't see the crowds being anyone except those who are already supporters and are already there to hear what they already all agree to do. So as far as approaching it differently, collaboratively, reasoning together, we have two parties in our country that will meet on, quote, Capitol Hill, and seldom do they collaborate so that the outcome will be greater than the sum of its parts, which would benefit those on whose behalf they serve and bear representation. So that's regrettable. It's a great expense. This happens when we study and research, when we want to cling to something we've dealt with in the past. So let's just start first. We'll say, first of all, this is not a problem to be fixed. It's not a problem to be fixed. That's a large assumption. Corporations have spent billions of dollars over the decades and perhaps 2 centuries in this country paying for solutions for which there's no problem. So let's just start off with this. Secondly, let's notice reign is the word here. God reigns. The Bible says he reigns forever. And the word sovereignty, this word itself is not in the Bible. We're talking about our English Bible, the one we agreed to use in this class. It's a product of formal equivalency. It's the last handmade, if you will, Bible, the King James Bible. It ranks up there with all the controversy and the energy, which is why we want that to study and understand what texts are being bantered. We use the Textus Receptus, the F.H.R. Scribner's work from Cambridge University specifically, and then, of course, the Hebrew. So God reigns, he's a king, and now we have 3. We'll define free will. Define free will. First, notice that God created man causal, created man a causal being. We remember Adam was not deceived, Eve was. Eve then persuaded Adam. He was persuadable. He caused himself to eat. You can notice in the Old Testament where God told Moses to use the rod that he was carrying in his hand so that when he entered Egypt to communicate and convince the people, the Hebrew slaves there under the tyrant Pharaoh, he said, cast down the rod, it became a serpent. He said, take it up again, it returned to being a staff. He said, do that so that they might cause themselves to believe. So causal being, it's in Hebrew, you can look this up. Hifil is a causal active stem. Causal active. And then, of course, hafal is causal passive. Again, this can become innocuous. You'll find people have really no interest in it like you think they would, causal passive, mainly because they have the energy to banter or argue or to dispute or divide or recruit someone to their side and elevate the conversation to, I call it a phonetic fight. It's just noise in the room. But when you actually go to the text, we don't find anything. We don't find the problem of God who reigns. We don't find anything in the Bible to contradict. So let's look at a text for a moment. Revelation 2:21, very familiar with us. Jesus writes to this church, and this is ecclesiastical letter. Book of Revelation is a church letter. So he said, indeed, speaking of Jezebel, Edokah, I gave, this is aorist, I gave Alte to her, and we're doing our Koine because this is our Koine class. We want to remain true to our discipline, but in this text, we'll see some astounding things, very insightful to her, chronon. Let's notice that from chronos, as in chronological. So he gave her a time span. I looked it up, and in Blue Letter Bible, it says space. So he's given her space here. So a time span, a finite amount of time, which if you just pause there for a moment, whatever the duration of that time was, and I'll just say 7 days, let's say he gave her a full 7-day week, he would have to suspend the fact that that time and chance happens to every man. So he suspended anything that could happen to her during this time span. And then he says very specifically, in order that, and then we have this term, meta, no, say, this is aorist subjunctive active, that she might, and I'll just write, no, I'll go ahead and do it, mind in association with, and it's with the genitive case. I'll place it over here. Remember, meta with the accusative case is after, as in a sequence, as we have spoken before. Out from tes, these are very familiar words, porneos, those of you that are using this, the fornication, autes, of her, so her particular fornication of her. And then it says, and kai u, and not mete. That's the augment here for this one. Mete no asen sa se. That's a removable knee. So this is third person singular here. So she did not. So this aorist indicative, this is aorist subjunctive. She might mind in association with, and notice this, to make an exit out from her particular fornication. Now, association with, especially we know it's him who's speaking. We know it's the purpose. So here's the purpose here. We have could, that's the ability, that she should, that's the obligation. Now remember, all chance has been suspended. Nothing will happen to her that happens to all of us, which the Bible says that time and chance happens to every man. Not during this. Notice that. Would, and then of course could. That's the, oh no, I already have could, sorry. So we have could, here's the expectation. So first we want to notice one thing, because I heard a debate between open and closed theism, and they left out, omitted living, open versus closed. Now those are formed categories. You notice that. We deal with that a lot in the language class. The Bible teaches living, God. It mentions the creation, man's a living soul. And here, interactive, God's interactive. That's the chief feature. So he interacts with us in what we can say here, simply stated, in this dimension, of this dimension of time and space. And God interacts, and he does so according to, he created the environment. He had created the living world before he ever placed the living man and fashioned the man from the dust of the ground of that living environment. So I suppose the only way I can do it is just say that in the realm of eternality, that's all I can. This is boundless. There's nothing here bounded. We're bounded in time and space. God interacts according to time and space. He's omniscient. Omniscient, of course, that's because he's the omni-scientist. He's the omni-scientist. He's so 1, 2. He's omnipresent. Present 3, and he's omnipotent. So there's really nothing that we could even conject into this that would contradict anything about God outside of this time and space. Now, the multidimensionality of God, there's author like a Hugh Ross, a mastermind, a genius, and he's written you have to really be ready to and want to think higher than what we're normally asked to think. But this is where the open versus closed is really not a problem. For example, first we notice that there's no negative externality. There's no negative externality with God. So for him to suspend and remove chance, which for this to be true, there can't be any chance any longer happen to her. I mean, if I tell someone that owes me rent that I'll give them an extra 30 days, it doesn't mean that something won't happen to them where that 30 days never occurs. I can't give them 30 more days on a calendar. I can't add a month to a 12-month calendar. I can't give them, and I certainly can't, as I'm not the one who reigns, but we do need to not miss the bigger things that we learn from the text, that he, for this woman who was teaching in this ecclesia, remember this is ecclesiastical, so he has great interest. The Bible says in Revelation 2:1, he conducts in midst of his churches, so he is directly, immediately involved. Jesus even told us we wouldn't be left as orphans, but that he would ask the Father to send another comforter of the same kind, and that he would come, and then Jesus assured us that he would always be with us to the end of the age in that disciple-making process, which is what occurs in ecclesias. That's about discipleship. That's about those who are following with him, deliberately carrying out and conducting according to his teachings, doing it his way, under his headship. He's the shepherd, we're the flock. He's the head, we're the body. He's the one husband, we're the one espoused to him. So that's all self-evident. So this direct and immediate involvement, even in time and space, is even more intimate inside time and space as it's here in an ecclesia, which is very consistent with the church letters. But now if you can handle that, it's no problem that he suspended chance and gave her a time span, then the idea that somehow, I don't know how this even became, also, there's something people say there's a butterfly effect. If the wing of a butterfly flutters, I guess, out of time, I don't know what they're referring to, but I guess we could look that up sometime, but that it would cause a tidal wave or tsunami somewhere else. That would assume there's no one who reigns, and that this is not a fine-tuned universe that is precise and exact as it is designer designed it to be habitable for mankind. So I'll just go ahead and put that there. There's no butterfly effect, as if this would just go off the rails. So number two, for her to have repented, if she had repented, there would be, now just go back here. If she had repented, there would be no negative externalities. There would be no butterfly effect, because he suspended everything that could possibly have happened to her during this. And to bring an interesting observation by J.R. Graves in this book, God's Sovereignty and Free Moral Agency. If you don't have one, it's really handy and it's very durable. It's to be used. He said that God has not chosen to decree moral actions, only the consequences of moral acts. And here in this text, we see that she doesn't have a decree from God to be teaching the things that she was teaching. She doesn't have a decree from him to carry out this conduct. And he is intervening, giving us explicit information that it is not permitted what she's doing. He never permitted it. So when we hear permissive will, we need to be careful to not be too comfortable with that. God is, and Jesus is responding here. She didn't trigger him. She came in and this began to happen where he's already conducting. So she entered into his domain, if you will, where he is conducting in his ecclesias, and he's now confronting her. Okay, so let me make that clear. And the idea that somehow someone asked, is it possible? A libertarian free will says, could you have done otherwise? So here we are. Let's just say this is Jezebel, and here she is, and now she's gone. Let's say a downward path. And she's being told to come back up here. Or there's a terminal consequence. You can read that. Similar to our culture, as wonderful as we are, as liberated as we are, as all that we speak of in the United States and our freedom, there's consequences. You can have a life sentence still in the United States, be in a cage the rest of your life. You can be placed on, receive the death penalty in the United States. So there's a terminal consequence. And this down here, this time span here is what we have seen that he's given her, which does nothing to alter the world. The world doesn't go out of control. Yes, she could have, should have, and it was expected that she would, and there was a purpose communicated to her, and there was a directive given to her to mind in association with it, and God did not decree that she would not repent. And of course, the idea that somehow we have in the Old Testament the principle of train up a child, left to its own, downward, as we notice if you study anything about statistics of societies and sociology, and when you see children without parents, for example, orphaned, children without a father to direct, instruct. So we're told to train up a child in the way they should go. So of course, there's a inclination downward. The instruction comes to nurture us upward, but it can't even be conceived in the Bible that if someone were to follow the right direction, that somehow that would be a problem. It certainly wouldn't have anything to do with God. He's immutable. He can't be affected. He can't be changed. Things can't go off the rails. Things can't then, in any way possible. He can't, as the eternal one, the one who knows all things, can't be surprised in anything, as we would say he had not noticed. He's the one that set the terms and the conditions. He suspends all time and chance. She's not subject to time and chance during this time span. So whatever this is, it seems to not be, whatever the problem has been presented, and I believe in the debate, someone was suggesting, asking questions, the one I listened to, can you change your future? Well, I think that's the whole reason why we have the Bible, is because you're going this way and God intervenes, sends an ambassador, your father corrects you, your neighbor, if you have one who loves you, corrects you, instructs you. We help people. We tutor people. We intervene all the time, and never with the idea that if the person does respond, that it might be, but what does that do to, well, it won't do anything to God. But strangely enough, in this time and space environment that he himself created, that was here before he ever placed us into it, he's suspending the consequence of chance so that she might, that's a purpose, could, should, and would. So I don't know. I think the argument might have a lot to do with people who have a lot less to do than what we do. Let's say I work at a church, interact, counsel families, intervene for families, come alongside in crises. We have funerals. We have great things. Like recently we had a birth of a child and then we had a funeral. So we have both ends of the spectrum, but it's never entered our minds what the conversations are out there. There were people present them to us as if it's a problem, because it would have to say then this text wasn't true, and the one who's the way, the life, and the truth, Jesus, who then communicated it, would not be communicating the truth. And it doesn't contradict the eternality of God. It doesn't change his omniscience, his omnipresence, his omnipotence. So I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure why, except this may just be another title to an old banter, and people just simply want to use their own formed categories. They want to use their own irreconcilable, so that collaboration doesn't occur. Because if you move on, you define free will, you know man's causal, you know God's the one who reigns, he creates man causal, that there's not a problem here to fix, and you move on and focus on what we're here to do. The question would be, what is all this that others are so preoccupied with? What is that accomplishing? I'm not sure, but we were told to occupy until he comes. So you have a blessed day and enjoy this lesson.